Hello, this is Darren Pulsifer, Chief Solution Architect of Public Sector at Intel, and welcome to Embracing Digital Transformation, where we investigate effective change leveraging people, process, and technology. On today's episode, we're going to talk about kickstarting your organizational transformation to data-centric, specifically organizational foundation, with our special guest, Sarah Kalicin, lead data scientist in our data center group at Intel.
Hi, Darren. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. It's been a couple weeks since we talked last. This is our second episode on kickstarting your organizational transformation. Very exciting subject today.
Yes, very exciting. I'm really excited to be able to talk about this today. So
let's
something that.
Oh, go ahead.
This is something that, a lot of organizations struggle through. So this is a really important topic.
Let's talk about the pipeline. We mentioned it in our first episode on this. Just quickly, can you go over the pipeline again and why we're going to talk about organizational foundation today?
Yeah, the pipeline, really needs to start with having a solid organization foundation to be able to support your analytics and AI initiatives. Anything that's data driven needs to start with the organization. So organization foundation, I kind of have like the typical friction points that organizations have. Sometimes it starts with some executive who just read a Harvard Business Review or the Wall Street Journal, and they're seeing kind of what other competitors or other companies are doing in the space of analytics and AI. And they're like, we've got to have this. And they set that the expectation to the organization. And essentially, it goes down the organization, and the organization is like, oh, we need to have data. We need to do something with data. We need to do big data. We need to do AI. We need to do this and that. And it can cause a lot of stir with an organization. Management has a really key role here. For organizations that have been successful, it really needs to be, what's the business value that we want to get from it? How are we going to use this, use data to get business value? So sitting down and understanding kind of what value you want to get, how is this going to impact the company, or how you want to have it impacted, has to come from management. And then provide a path for success, getting the organization together, getting the right people, making sure people are trained, making sure that, organizations are resourced in order to be able to support that. Once you figure out kind of the business, and we'll talk a little bit about what this looks like. From that, you do want to then figure out, okay, here's the business questions that we want to have. You then need to go and make sure you have the data. So getting the data collection and preparation, getting the data. If you don't have the data, then how do you go and start collecting that information and storing it and so forth? Once you have it, then you have to go through kind of essentially figure out how you're going to transfer that, form that data from raw data to insights, and what kind of information is actually contained in that. And then from that, you can create your insights, the next part of it is then trying to figure out how do you operationalize that. And this takes a lot of time, and there's a lot of stumbling parts around this. So one of the biggest parts is really the organizational foundation.
Have you ever seen organizations that went through and skipped the organizational foundation and did data collection, insight creation, and analytics deployment without the organizational foundation first? And did that work or not? I mean, why have that?
Why have that? The organizations that I've seen successful has been a whole organization a plan around that. Organizations, sure, if you have small data, you can do this really quickly, but we're not talking small data. when you're talking about from a large corporation point of view, you're talking about large amounts of data. So you're thinking about lots of capital to be able to build this. Different diverse teams be able to come together and talk about, and I'll get into a little bit more of that in a few minutes, what I call kind of a strong organizational foundation. But no, you really do have to have this organization foundation to make sure that you get the alignment of the organization, and then also making sure that you're resourcing it. The other part of it too is also doing the training, getting the statistical literacy around how to use data, how to question data, how to ask and answer questions with data. And that isn't something that is that it just magically appears. That it ends up becoming a cultural part that you have to build within your teams.
Okay, so if I don't have that organizational foundation up front, it's a small science experiment, basically. It's a one of. We're talking about organizational change, right? We want fundamental change. So let's walk through, what does this mean? You had a great article that you referenced from MIT Sloan Management Review.
Right. So this past October, will be in October 2019, MIT Sloan Management Review had an article called Winning with AI. And in this, they defined different personas of organizations. And one of the personas that they defined out here were the pioneers, which were only 20% of the respondents on this and the respondents were throughout the entire world, from different industries, from really large enterprises. One of the things that when they looked at these pioneers, they noticed that these organizations, got the most out of their AI initiatives. And when they looked at why that was the case, most of it was because they were really, really focused on their business strategy and making sure that the data that they were using was really influencing their entire business model. So you think about this, if you think about your business model is about, how do I maximize revenue while minimizing my operating expenses? You can use data to basically try to figure that out. And the companies that are going to be successful are really going to make sure that there's a really big gap between your revenue and your operating expenses. And that's kind of what they were kind of showing in this paper. So they were these companies were generating value from AI revenue, rather than cost savings alone.
So have you, just second on the cost savings thing, you have a lot of experience with organizations that just focus on cost savings alone, right? And don't worry about the revenue. No, we're going to use AI to cut costs. And it always seems to just go not far enough, right?
It does. A lot of times it depends on what you're trying to do with cost savings. So manufacturing is a big thing where you can get a lot of cost savings, because that's kind of you always want to try to maximize your yields and so forth. But if you're not looking at other ways of being able to, delight your customers, you might be losing out on anything, because you can only shrink your costs so much versus, being able to maximize your revenue through, being able to get more customers, being able to delight your customers, depending on kind of what industry you're in.
Cool. All right. The next thing that you mentioned to me earlier, we talked a little bit about this, was support in the organization. So it's having that C-level executive support versus just it coming out of IT. Big difference in success, right?
Right. And this is a big, this is another thing that in this paper, it talked about, that the C-level executives who tended to be closer to the business units were much more successful than those that were where these initiatives were really rooted in AI. So two things come out of that. One is AI isn't really a technology, is not really a technology. It's really an organizational enablement part. Also, data is very contextual, meaning that the closer the data is, or understanding kind of how that data can be used and the questions around that, it doesn't surprise me that your C-level executives who are driving this, it's closer to kind of the business model and the context of how the data is being used. I could almost see kind of, if you're not really integrating your analytics within the business, and it becomes almost like an academic exercise if an organization that doesn't really understand the business or can't influence the business to be using that data effectively, I can see why IT is not as effective as having it in the BUs.
Now, this goes on to how to really create business value then, because you really focused on creating business value, whether you're saving costs, but mostly creating new revenue streams or whatever it is, or new ways of, especially like in the federal market, new ways to serve constituents or citizens of the government. So let's talk about the questions. What sorts of questions do you ask? Right, because you got to find those business values somewhere, right? So what sorts of questions do we want to ask?
So I would just be going into the BU or the business unit and just say, hey, what things keep you up at night? What value do you want to be getting out of your business? What things do you feel like you don't have insights into on here? And we'll take a manufacturing example. Like, hey, what's keeping my yields from degrading my yields? How can I start cutting waste? Where's the waste coming through in my manufacturing line? And just start going through those questions and brainstorm that with a bunch of if this is a manufacturing plant, with the yield and the different leaders within the manufacturing line. If you're dealing with marketing or customer experience type of things, what are kind of some of the questions that you think you want to have? And start just brainstorming through that, and then try to prioritize the business problems, looking at kind of the complexity of the question and also the impact you think would have. And then start tackling kind of the big impact, low complexity problems by then trying to figure out what kind of data you have.
You first go after the high business impact, low complexity. Those are the first ones you go after then.
Right. And you want to do this because you really want to be able to get some quick wins and be able to showcase how this can happen. How do you ask questions and be able to answer that with data? And the first couple times, organizations go through, they stumble a lot. This isn't easy. Getting data is not easy. It can even be harder. You really need to have discipline around this, and this is where management support really needs to come in, because they're the ones who are going to start setting the expectation on that. And I guess that comes into the next conversation. What does a strong organization foundation look like?
Great. So let's talk about that. We've asked questions. We've categorized our questions. Now, how do I form this strong organizational foundation to help support these programs moving forward, or this change that we're going through?
Okay, so you define the problems or the business value you want. From that, you then have to break that down into some kind of way of defining that problem and make it into workable steps. So having some kind of way of being able to have a problem solving approach that everyone in the room can say, yes, this is the way that we're going to break this down. This is the way that we're going to solve this, and not just go, try to figure out what the answer. You're going to go try to find the data. The other part of it is you want to make sure that you have the right team of experts in that room. You want management sponsorship, and it's not buy-in, it's commitment. You want them committed to this process. They're committed to the problem solving process, the way that the teams are going to be coming together, making sure that they're resourced properly and that they're given time to actually solve these problems. The other thing too is the team and including management have to understand this isn't linear. You have to think this as a continuous improvement practice. Get something small, wins on it where you can iterate going through, iterate as you go forward. And sometimes, the data that you think is the most convenient might not necessarily be the right data. So, as you're going in and trying to figure out where your data sources are, you might have to go back and realize this data is not giving us anything. Maybe there's a different source, or you might have to go through and clean it up in a way that can be usable.
So that concept of kind of checking yourself as you go through is important, right? So you don't have a team go off for 2 years and then come back with information that's not usable anymore. You want to be able to give some feedback and things as you're working through it, right?
Right. I mean, I'll give you an example. I had one organization I was working in, and I gave them requirements of what needed to be in the database. A year later, they came back, and I wanted to go start analyzing data and start creating some models. And then I'm like, okay, this model is not as good as it should be. Working with some of the domain experts. And one of the domain experts says, oh, you should be using this variable. You should be using this other variable. And I went back to the database, and that variable wasn't in the database. So I had to go back and tell the database team, hey, I need this variable, which took another 3 months. So, I mean, this gives you an example of, having the right team of experts and making sure that, everybody respects each other, and you can be able to get the right requirements of your data and what data needs to be in there.
I love it.
Yeah. Other aspects too is, having the right software and hardware infrastructure. You're talking about big data. You need to be able to create really sophisticated data pipelines to be able to move that data. There's a lot of new technology out there that really helps streamline that. So, this is where management needs to understand that they're going to be investing money on this in order for this to happen. I've seen organizations spend a lot of time getting data into a database, but not really give the organization the right software to be able to process that data. I've seen one organization, they're relying on Excel, which is not really a viable tool to be able to let people, analyze data. Invest in your people and provide training on using real analytics software so that they can, do more with their data, which then goes to the whole culture and resources. Culture isn't something that, the data scientists or your data engineers own. It's the entire organization. You don't want your data scientists or your data engineers going off and doing their own work and not getting it incorporated back. Their work will end up becoming an academic exercise if the rest of the organization doesn't buy into that. So you really want to make sure the organization understands, they're bought in, they're embracing the data insights, they're seeing the value in that. So this is where the culture is really important. And culture comes from, exposure and training. and making sure that you have the right resources so the team can be successful, and this work will be developed in the right way.
I love how you said that the data is valued and the work of the analysts is valued. I think that's part of a cultural thing too, because if I do value the data coming out of my analytics team, then I am going to invest in them. So it really shows the value that they're bringing, and they'll do better work, and your whole organization will see how important it is. So I love that. That's great. All right, so now I've got some foundation things. There's some major new roles that we're starting to see bubble up. Some of them have been around for some time now. Tell me about, the organizational changes that we're seeing around data and analytics and insight and all those things.
Yeah, I'm hearing a lot of the need to define the roles and responsibilities for key executives in the analytics space. So you hear about your chief analytics officer or your chief AI officer, or how does that compare to your chief data officer or your CIO or your chief information officer or infrastructure officer. From my point of view, I really see the chief analytics officer or the chief data scientist versus the chief data officer versus the chief information officer or the IT chief IT person as three separate roles where each one of them has a different focus. The chief analytics officer, I'm going to call the chief analytics officer versus the chief data scientist, or you could also hear them as the chief AI officer. These people are going to be helping the organization enable how analytics and AI work in relationship to the business strategy. These are analytic translators that will work with the other C-suite to figure out how can they leverage analytics and AI for their business. How can we, maximize revenue or minimize operating costs? They're going to be the ones who are going to be really looking at how that is going to be delivered and executed.
Okay, so if they're worrying about analytics, tell me more about the CDO, because I always thought the CDO was responsible for the data strategy and getting analytics out. So this is a little new to me.
Yeah, so the analytic officers really is focused on the analytic and AI strategy. Okay, how do you use that data in order to to get that business to get the business results? The CDO is really looking at the data strategy. So there's a difference between data strategy and analytic strategy. The data strategy is really about how do you curate the organization's data so that the chief analytics officers and their data science teams can utilize the data. All right. They work these two organizations, need to work really closely together. Where the data strategy is about curating and security of the data and being able to clean and maintain and thinking about data quality,
So that includes things like data governance, lifecycle management, all those things, cleaning the data. I got it. So one's kind of more operational around the data, and even though there's strategy around that, the analytics is how can I now use that data to create real value for the business.
Right, because you don't want the people who are working with the data to get insights to be dealing with kind of the mandate. How does this need to be stored? How does it, how does it need to be cleaned and so forth? They do influence those decisions, but they need to be empowered to be able to have the bigger conversations about what to do with that data.
Gotcha. Okay. No. So what about the CIO, Chief Information Officer?
So this team is really about the infrastructure, software and hardware infrastructure, to be able to enable the data engineers and the data scientists and be able to do their work. So these people are going to be securing, building, and maintaining the software and hardware infrastructure to be able to support any of the data work. So this is, building the data pipelines, getting and ensuring that the data can flow from, based on the requirements from the data engineers and the data scientists. So they all have to work together in order for this to work, where the chief analytics officer and the data scientists are going to define how the data is going to be used, building those models, building those dashboards, and so forth, to provide the insights. The chief data officer and his or her team of data engineers will be curating the data, making sure the data is ready to be used by the analytic work, while the CIO and infrastructure teams and the solution architects are going to be looking to the data engineers and the analysts and the data scientists on, what hardware and software enable their work.
Gotcha. All right. So now I've got two new C-suite positions. There's always this big, huge question: completely decentralized or centralized, or there's lots of weird options in here. So can we quickly go through some of those options? Where do I place these guys? Where do they all sit?
There's this McKinsey report or document called 10 Red Flags Signaling Your Analytics Program. In it, it really did a great job of showcasing kind of the pros and cons of the organizational alignment models. They focus on the CDO officer on here, but you can almost do the same thing with the analytics officer and the CIO on here. And it really looks at, does it make sense to decentralize, being that each of the business units have one or any of these, or do you completely centralize? The benefit about having something that's completely decentralized is you're putting the expertise right within the business. These data workers are going to be really intimate about the data and understand that, and that's a high value. But depending on the organization, you might not necessarily be able to support having so many data professionals in each of the business units. The other thing too is you then also have, if you have ones or twosies of data professionals in there, they also can become very lonely and not be able to, because there's silos and so forth, they might not necessarily be able to leverage off of other expertise within the company. So that's where having something that's more centralized can be much more beneficial.
Gotcha. So hey, this is great. These are a lot of new things that organizations have to figure out. Not only the cultural change, but the organizational change that comes with this. I really have seen this in practice when people they just say, hey, AI, like you said at the beginning, the CEO read something in the Wall Street Journal. Hey, we need to do AI too. Go do it. That's not good enough. It requires fundamental changes in the way that we think, organizational changes. And I love the way that you've kind of laid this out to help us go through this major shift that we're seeing in our organizations. Thanks for listening to Embracing Digital Transformation today. If you liked our episode, go ahead and give us 5 stars on your favorite podcast or video streaming site. You can also find out more on embracingdigital.com. Until next time, keep moving forward and embrace the digital revolution.